Today's chapter is chapter 10 called Suspense. We left off with chapter 9 talking about conflict, and we got to learn a lot more information about our villain or anti hero, Joey Gilbert. We know that he doesn't have a great life either, and instead of using kindness with others, he chooses to take his anger and sadness out on the people around him. Let's go ahead and read chapter 10 and find out a little bit more. It is called Suspense. Our teacher, Mrs. Smith, says that every good story has to have some suspense, and not just the scary stories that call themselves suspense or adventure. She made us look up the word in her giant dictionary, which was almost always harder than you'd think. And it was this time. I looked up suspense, which is tough enough to do because that dictionary has 100 million words that start with the letter S. Then the dictionary person had this for a definition: an exciting apprehension to an approaching climax, which is not any help at all. So I had to look up apprehension and approaching, even though I was pretty sure about that one, and I had it right. And climax, which I'm not sure about, although there is a chapter coming up by that name, climax. So maybe you can have suspense wondering what goes on in there. Looking up apprehension made me have to look up other words like anticipation, and this is almost always what happens when Mrs. Smith makes us look up words in her dictionary. So it took me a very long time to get it. Suspense really means that you're kind of afraid because you don't know what's going to happen. But you know that 9 times out of 10 times it's going to be a pretty bad thing. Like when I ended that last chapter like this. Sometimes it seemed like Joey Gilbert was one big conflict waiting to happen. We didn't have to wait long. I'll bet you weren't thinking that a good thing was going to happen. You knew that something bad was coming. That's suspense. But it's not going to happen in this chapter, so you can relax. Now I'm back to the place where I ought to be in the story, and it's Wednesday. On Wednesday, Mrs. Smith finished up reading the whole entire fair day to us. It was a pretty good play, and it even had some suspense, although none of the scary suspense. Most of the boys would have liked it better if it had some scary stuff, especially Joey Gilbert, who kept saying stuff like, "This is boring," or "That's stupid." At the end of the play, all the characters are on stage. It's the big fair. And Tom asks Adeline to ride the Ferris wheel with him, and he gives her this stuffed bear he won by busting balloons with darts. She finally says yes, and she will ride the Ferris wheel with him, and I have to admit that Joey was right about that part because it's kind of lame. But it's also the place where there's suspense because we don't know if she's going to forgive Tom for what she thought that he did. It turns out he didn't really do it, but her friend lied about it. But Adeline forgives Tom anyway, even though he really didn't do anything, and she takes the bear and heads for the Ferris wheel with him. The end. Mrs. Smith didn't ask us what part we wanted to try out for in the play. She's pretty smart and probably knew we'd all want to be Adeline or Tom. So she and Miss Connolly, the other 4th grade teacher, had it worked out that we would all read Adeline's or Tom's part. Then they'd hear enough to know who should be in those parts and who should be the other parts and who should stay backstage and hang up scenery. Mrs. Smith passed out 2 pages of script to all of us. Every single one of us took the script, even larger than my Flora, and even Joey Gilbert, who had griped all week about how stupid this was. The script looked like this. Tom: "What's the matter with you?" Adeline: "Me? Nothing's the matter with me, but I want you to know that I know what you and Elizabeth have been doing behind my back." Tom: "What? I don't know what you're talking about, Adeline." And that's how it went, trading lines between those 2 main characters. "You'll have tonight to work on your lines," Mrs. Smith said. "Try to memorize them as much as you can. I'll give you class time today, too. Miss Connolly's class will be doing the same thing, and we'll hold tryouts together tomorrow. She and I will assign the parts after tryouts. We only have 3 weeks to rehearse and make our scenery and to get the word out." "Who's going to come to our stupid play?" Joey asked. Wayne laughed. "The other elementary students, for one," Mrs. Smith answered. "Your parents and brothers and sisters and grandparents, too." I knew my brothers wouldn't come to the play if I promised to make their beds for a whole year. I would have liked for my daddy to see me on stage and maybe get the idea for himself that I could be a good actress when I got out of school, but I didn't know if he'd come either. For the rest of the day, we were supposed to pair off with a partner and practice learning our lines for the tryouts. I hate when we pair off with partners because unless Teresa or Amanda are mad at me or mad at each other, I never have another person to partner with, and they weren't mad at each other today. I watched the other kids trade desks and divide up like Noah's Ark animals 2 by 2. Then I saw that Laura and I were the only unpartnered girls, and Eric was the only boy by himself. "Hey, hillbilly face!" Eric shouted, dancing up to me. "Practice with me!" Normally, I would have told Eric to shut his face, and maybe some other things that wouldn't have made it into this book, but seeing as how my only other choice was Laura, I said, "Okay, rat breath." Eric tried to sit on the floor beside my desk, but he couldn't keep still. "What's the matter with you?" he asked, his voice sounding funny like a hammer hitting wood. "Nothing," I snapped, thinking he was making fun because I looked as nervous as I was. "What's wrong with you?" "That's the first line, dumbhead," Eric explained. I looked at my script. "Oh, yeah." Then I read Adeline's first line. "Me? Nothing's the matter with me, but I want you to know that I know what you and Elizabeth have been doing behind my back." All around the room I heard the exact same words being said by different voices. It made me think of what an echo in a fun house might sound like. Eric read Tom's next line. He was a pretty bad reader, which I already knew from when we were reading in class. When he said Tom's words, all the words had the same loudness, kind of like a robot. I went on with the rest of the script, all about how Adeline, which was me, thought Tom, which was Eric, was cheating on her with Elizabeth because Elizabeth had told Adeline that Tom wanted to ride the rides with her, that is, Elizabeth. "This is so lame," Eric complained. "Shut up and read your lines," I said. "I need to go to the bathroom." Eric went to go to the bathroom instead. I glanced over at Laura. She was reading Mrs. Smith's copy of the whole play. I figured she must have decided not to try out after all, which was probably a good decision because Joey wasn't finished with his conflict. Eric came back from the bathroom. Then he went to the pencil sharpener. Then he went to see how Joey and Wayne were doing. Then he went to the pencil sharpener again. I was going to have to learn my lines all by myself when I got home, which I knew could be a big fat problem. "What the deuce's devil do you think you're up to?" my middle big brother Matt sneaked up on me in the living room. I had come home to an empty house right after school and curled up on the living room couch to learn my lines. I was surprised to see how it was almost dark outside. That's how hard I'd been trying to memorize. Not that it had done me much good. Adeline's words were refused to stick in my brain. "Where's Luke?" I asked, not answering Matt's question on purpose because he would tear up the script faster than the math book, and it would matter more to me. "How the fiery blazes should I know?" Matt turned on the TV and headed for the couch. I escaped before he sat on me. I looked out the front window at the dark shadows over our lawn. Luke should have been home. I would have called Daddy, except for he should have been home too, and I didn't know where to call him. I spent about 15 minutes worrying before I saw Daddy's truck drive up and Luke got out. When they came in through the kitchen, Luke was crying, and Daddy was yelling at him. "You get to your room," Daddy shouted, "and if I ever catch you doing that again, you won't be able to get, you hear?" Luke ran by me, bumping into me in the doorway. He was still crying, and he didn't look up at me. This is the kind of trouble I don't mess in, so I can't tell you what happened to Luke, or why our daddy picked him up and brought him home late. And if that makes for suspense, then you should know straight up that you're not going to find out in this book. And I'm just sorry about that, but that's just the way it is. Matt made himself scarce. In the kitchen, Daddy slammed things. Cupboards, fridge, drawers. I tiptoed up to my room and tried to memorize lines, but I might as well have been hunting snipes. I fell asleep trying to learn Adeline. When I woke up, I still had my clothes on. My script was wrinkled under one leg. I changed some of my clothes, washed up, grabbed my wrinkled script, and ran all the way to the school in the dark before dawn. I have this secret place behind the school, outside the backstage door. Sometimes when Daddy's been drinking or Matt's meaner than usual, I go there and do homework. Or not. Sometimes I just sit on the step and maybe think about being an actress or moving to New York or Hollywood. That's where I headed now, not New York City or Hollywood. My secret step. I needed to practice. Today was tryouts, the day when my whole future could get decided. I ran behind the school and slipped past the big green evergreen bush. In all my years at Paris Elementary, I never even saw one single person besides me sitting on that step. Only today there was. Larger-than-life Laura. I thought about turning around and looking for a new secret spot, but Laura must have seen me standing there. "Hi, Lainey," she said. "Do you want your spot back?" "How did you know I started. She scooted over like she was going to share my step with me. "Did you get your lines memorized?" I looked down at my script and shook my head. It made me mad that she was even asking this, so I said kind of mean like, "Did you?" Because I had already figured that she had quit, since she'd didn't look at that script very long in our classroom. I did, Laura said. That surprised me, and if I didn't want to put in more cliches here, I would have said that it took the wind out of my sails. Could you use some last-minute help, Lainey? She asked. I wanted to scream at her that it wasn't fair she could learn lines so fast, and I'd tried and couldn't remember any of them. I wanted to shove her face in, with that smile that was still there, when I couldn't rightly remember the last time I'd smiled. She patted the step. Come on, I'll read Tom's lines. Won't do any good. I sat on the very edge of my step, as far away from her as I could get. I looked around real quick to make sure that nobody saw me sitting next to her. I knew that people like Maddie Simpson had to be careful who they sit themselves next to. Their reputations are at stake, and I almost understood why Maddie, in all the 5 years we went to school together, had never once sat herself next to me. What I hadn't figured out before right then was that a person like me had to think about this same thing, and I didn't like that feeling, but that's the way it was. Laura started right out. Without looking at the script, she said Tom's line, What's the matter with you? I closed my eyes and hoped that overnight thing had happened to me, like when people say they slept on it and in the morning it came to them. I thought maybe that would happen to me. I had slept on the script. Maybe it had finally worked its way into my brain. Nothing's wrong with me, I said as Adeline, but I knew that wasn't exactly right, and worrying about what I had left out kept me from remembering what came next. Oh, I don't know, I said to myself. Laura said the whole Adeline line, and she didn't leave out anything. Then she said Tom's next line without looking at the script, and when I couldn't come up with Adeline's words, she came up with those too. How do you do that? I asked, so worked up I didn't know whether to cry or scream my head off. Laura gave me that smile. Think of it as a poem, Lainey. I got a little apprehension then, which means I got scared of what might be coming next. I thought she might whip out one of her poems on me, and who knows what she could say. Instead, she went on, Not all poems rhyme, but they all have a rhythm, and that's what makes them easy to memorize. A long time ago, people sang history in ballads, so ordinary people who couldn't read could pass down that history. I still didn't know what this had to do with me getting Adeline's words into my head. So what? I asked again, kind of mean-like again. Listen to the lines, Lainey. Hear them in the rhythm. She repeated the lines, the same lines I'd been pounding my brain to get into my head. But when she said the words, they came out different. They sounded like music, or a boat rocking side to side, in little waves on the ocean. How did you do that? I asked when she'd done it the whole entire tryout script, all by heart. It's easy, look. She took my wrinkled script and divided Adeline's line, so it looked like this, for example. But I want you to know that I know what you and Elizabeth have been doing behind my back. Since you are just reading the words, you can't hear them like I did, but take my word for it that those divided up words made perfect sense when she said them in that rocking way. It made the lines sound like a song that's got stuck in your head. So maybe that explains what happened next, because I can't explain it any other way. I read the lines like Laura had divided them up, then she said Tom's part, and when I got to Adeline's next line, I could say them without looking. It was like I could hear them rocking. I could hear Laura's voice, hear it larger than life. But then it was full light. I heard a bus come up School Road, and I knew it was Joey Gilbert's bus. And even though Laura had just helped me take the biggest step toward my only dream in life, I hopped up off that step faster than bees sneeze, and I ran around the building just as that bus was pulling up. But in the window of that bus there was Joey Gilbert, and he was frowning out at me. And for one terrible moment I was sure that he'd seen me with larger-than-life Laura, and that I would never hear the end of it.